follow him on Twitter at KevinMC973. As all guests, he joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, how you doing today?
Doing good, Josh. How you doing?
Pretty good. So, obviously, you've been putting up a lot of content about the Sixers, and you're doing a great job. And wanted to touch on some of the things you've been writing about. But I think the biggest thing on everyone's mind right off the top has to be this whole Ben Simmons moving positions. And some people like it, some people don't. Right off the top, from you, I want to know, how much do you like it versus dislike it? Because I think a lot of people, they're extreme one way or the other on this.
I would say I'm extremely for it, just in the sheer fact of we get to see him in a new role, and we get to see the Sixers, kind of capitalize on the versatility of a guy with his skill. I mean, not many guys have come to the NBA with his size, his speed, and his ability to create for others. So, I mean, to throw him into a new role, to add more shooting around him and kind of give him things to tinker with and try and add a new level to his game, I think it's going to be very fun to see, and I think we see him kind of take the next step in his game.
Now, you mentioned take the next step in his game. I think a lot of people will look at, for example, the videos about him shooting and say that is part of the next step. But isn't also part of the next step in his game just being more consistent as a basketball player too, though?
Yeah, I think in terms of we see him take a step as a scorer just because, we'll see now either in a half-court set or even, times in transition where we'll see him, grab a rebound, take it coast to coast, and get to the rim. I mean, hopefully we see him in this new role be more aggressive as a scorer, but also still try to be the playmaker that he is.
I've always said that when it comes to the Sixers, I never understood why you had to have only one ball handler on the floor. And I understand the idea was, well, Josh Richardson can be a ball handler, and so can Tobias. But I think the bigger deal is the fact that if you can take pressure off of Simmons with Shake Milton, a guy who is obviously his main primary position has always been a ball-handling guard, that in and of itself gives the Sixers options that they just didn't have before.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be big in a tempo sense and also in a half-court sense because now when you not only are adding another ball handler, but adding another shooter now. So now we can see Ben move off the ball. They've talked about a lot using him in pick-and-roll situations as the roll man. So we'll see him in more off-ball situations, but also you could see him maybe be a facilitator in the low post. I mean, you have a lot of guys out there in Josh Richardson, Shake Milton, Tobias Harris, even Joel Embiid himself who can stretch the floor a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see this new spacing-wise and this new look of Ben Simmons doing new things as a scorer, but also seeing him in different spots as a playmaker, seeing what he can do.
Also, and I'm not trying to conjure any bad thoughts for people, but I was also thinking about this morning. One of the things that gets overlooked about the Milton-Simmons pairing is the fact that we've talked about in the past here on 97.3, that is, what was the whole point of drafting Markelle Fultz if it wasn't to have another ball handler on the court? So in many ways, isn't Shake Milton fulfilling the original vision for the player they wanted to play along with Ben Simmons?
Oh, absolutely. He fills that role of a combo guard who can play make, can also go out and get a bucket for himself. I mean, we saw Shake when the team was riddled with injuries. He stepped up as a scorer. He also showed he could play make, he can shoot. Basically everything that they were looking for in Markelle Fultz, the Sixers will get in Shake Milton. Obviously not to the degree that we thought we were going to get with Fultz when he was first drafted, but in terms of play style and what they're looking for in pairing with Ben Simmons, I would say, yeah, he is. He fits that type of or mold of player that they were looking for.
Kevin McCormick joining me here on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You got all of his Sixers and NBA coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. And Kevin, one of the articles you have up over there is about Al Horford. And to me, whether it's fair or not, I think Al Horford has been one of the disappointments for the Sixers season. But talk about how his new role could actually maybe amplify what he can bring to this team when the team returns to action.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, we saw all year the fit was not perfect, but, I mean, this new role, I think, be, kind of a new chapter for him in terms of his tenure in Philadelphia, just because, he'll be playing a lot more at center. He'll also be defending other centers, but they'll also get to use him, kind of how Boston used him as, a pick and pop kind of guy. He can stretch a little bit, but still be able to do his work in the post for the second unit. And it'll be good because we've seen in the past bench scoring has been an issue for the Sixers. So having a guy like Horford come off the bench now, whether it be in playoffs or in these seeding games, if the bench, they need a bucket, you have a veteran out there like Al Horford who you can just throw it down to him in the post. He can go get a quick bucket, or he can also facilitate. He's a great passer for a big man, and now that second unit, with Glenn Robinson, Ferk and Korkmaz, you're going to have spot-up shooters in that lineup as well, so you're going to need somebody to get the ball to him. I think Horford will be able to do that.
Is it maybe fair or not fair to say that even after this year, the Sixers need to reevaluate Al Horford's long-term future with this team?
I would say it's fair. Even if he plays well, I would say, you still can go back to the drawing board and look at the year as a whole. But I think if he steps into this new role and plays well, I think it'll be a favor for him to keep him as opposed to, kind of pushing the agenda of getting rid of him. But I would say it is definitely fair to say that no matter how well he does in the bubble, to say that, he still might need to be moved in the offseason.
How much of it then is on Horford versus how the Sixers use him? Because, there's always that contention about, is Brett Brown using the right rotations? But I also got to ask you, Kevin, as someone who's watching the team and covering the team, do you feel like that Horford is always putting his best foot forward?
I would say he's trying to. Obviously, there's been some situations where he's just kind of doing what he has to do for the team. I mean, if you look at his three-point numbers, the amount of three-pointers he shot in this shortened season was some of his highest in his career ever. So obviously he was out there just doing what he has to do. And I would say his game and his numbers a little bit, but I mean, who knows? He also said that, he's been dealing with some nagging injuries. So with months off, maybe we see a new, refreshed Al Horford announce new role. We see Al Horford doing Al Horford things instead of being in that clunky lineup and being put in situations where he just kind of, has to do things that aren't really his strong suit to benefit that lineup.
Speaking of the lineup, the rotations, I know Brett Brown has had a lot of conversation with the media about different things he wants to do, but what do you think is the best way to handle this rotation? Because I know that a lot of people assume what the starters are going to be, but what kind of play do you expect to see from the bench, and what would you do if you were Brett?
I think a lot of the bench rotation is going to come down to which of your shooters are going to get hot, and in that situation, those guys will carry the load most likely. You have Alex and Al Horford, who are your locks, who are going to come off the bench just because you're going to need that ball handling, and you're going to need Al Horford's size. But the Sixers have a lot of wings on that bench that they can go to, which is a benefit for them. You have Matisse Thybulle, you have Glenn Robinson III, you have Ferk and Korkmaz. So you have this batch of 3D guys who can come in and be kind of floor spacers and consistent shooters, but it's really all going to come down to who's hitting the shots. I mean, have options now. So say, Ferk and Korkmaz gets hot in these 8 seeding games. Maybe he sees more of the load off the bench than if Matisse Thybulle or Glenn Robinson, or maybe it's vice versa. I mean, we saw Matisse get hot early in the regular season, so if he comes back to that, to have his strong shooting and that defense, maybe we see a good amount of Matisse Thybulle in the playoffs. I think Brett has options in these 8 seeding games. We might see a little quiet tournament to see who gets to play.
Kevin McCormick joining me here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Go to 97.3ESPN.com or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Check out his Sixers coverage up there on the website and on the app. Kevin, let's go a little big picture here. How do the Sixers match up with the Eastern Conference best teams? It's a question that everyone has a perspective on. And I think I've asked pretty much anyone who covers the NBA of the Sixers here on 97.3. So I want you to know your perspective. How do the Sixers match up with teams like the Bucks, the Celtics, and the Raptors?
I think with this new lineup structure, they match up a lot better than they did with the original starting lineup. Because if you're looking at a team like Boston, who right now they're projected to face in the first round, they're a very small lineup. Their lineup is all wings. So now when you have this new, smaller, quicker Sixers lineup, top to bottom, the Sixers now arguably have a better roster than the Celtics and might be favored in that series, as opposed to with Al Horford. They might have seen some troubles on defense because he would have had to chase wing players around. But I still, in the beginning of the year, they were looked at as a favorite, and I think they should be looked at now. I think that sleeper team has been a good fit for them just because of how the regular season went. But in terms of the pieces and depth, I think the Sixers are up there with any team at the top of the Eastern Conference right now.
It's interesting you mentioned about Boston, how they match up, because I think a lot of people, one of the reasons why they think well of Boston, whether it's a fair or unfair point, is everybody loves Brad Stevens, right? Everyone's like, oh, Brad Stevens is so smart. But, the Sixers have beaten the Celtics multiple times this year. And since the series when they lost in the playoffs, Brett Brown has gotten the better of Brad more often than not. So how much is the perception of the Celtics just incorrect at this point?
I'd say the narrative's definitely changed in that matchup, just because, the Sixers have gotten better as a whole as well, and they have that one key factor in the matchup, and that's Joel Embiid. In the past, the main thing was Al Horford was the Embiid stopper, and that was kind of the kicker of the Celtics always having the edge on the Sixers. But now with Al Horford on the Sixers, the Celtics have no answer for Joel Embiid. So when they match up in the playoffs this time around and the game gets a lot slower and we see a lot of post play from Embiid, I think the matchup continues to go the same way it did in the regular season.
Are you concerned at all about a Sixers series with the Miami Heat?
Not entirely. I think in terms of maybe outside of the Bucks, the Heat arguably have the most size and the most bodies to throw at Joel Embiid. But if you look at that Heat team, it's a lot of young guys and a lot of inexperience. Yeah, they went and traded for Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder, but those guys are on their last legs. And if you're looking at this Sixers team compared to that Miami team, I would still say the Sixers not only have some better pieces, but also have more experience, which is key come playoffs.
I noticed you didn't mention Jimmy Butler there, so you're not worried at all about Butler getting in the Sixers' heads there?
There will be that dynamic, but we've seen the perimeter defender that Ben Simmons became this year, and he told the media during this week that he's gotten stronger and he feels better. So in terms of when they step out there, I think, that rivalry will still be there, and I think Ben will take the initiative of trying to shut down Jimmy. So I'm not too worried about Jimmy Butler in the playoff series.
If you're being objective, what percentage would you give the Sixers of making it to the NBA Finals in this NBA bubble?
Making it to the finals, I would say probably in that maybe 10 to 20% range, just because we still don't know what they're going to look like. So they could find lightning in a bottle, or it could just sputter out and it be a failed experiment. So you can't really say they're a lock to go far, but if this does work well in the way that they expect, I think we should see a serious playoff run from the Sixers.
Well, you've just proven that you're more objective than the majority of Twitter, so congratulations, Kevin.
Thank you.
He's Kevin McCormick. You can check out his work covering the 76ers at 97.3 ESPN.com. And as all guests, he joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Check out his Twitter at KevinMCC973. Kevin, appreciate the time. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Oh, thanks, Josh.